Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen Carpenter, and with me is my partner, co-host, and father, Brandon. Before we get started, for those of you on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. You can shut off that notification bell if you'd like. Facebook, like, comment, and share. And then, of course, on all platforms, spread the word to your friends. And now, to the opening notes. So Dad and I were talking about it. I read an article out of AgWeb Daily this week, and it was about regenerative agriculture, the number one food trend in 2020. And that's what the title was, Regenerative Ag, the number one food trend. And it was dated the 6th of January. And it just went over what was 2020's number one food trend. And it seems to be everything is kind of interesting with 2020 because of the pandemic, because that seemed to stem a lot of things and drive things forward. So the article talked about farmers, producers, and academics, along with government agencies and retailers, looking at the best practices to improve soil health and sequester carbon. So off the top, we're looking at sustainability, and then there's that political background too of the climate change and anything that's associated with that. Again, regenerative agriculture it has many definitions, but if you look it up, generally speaking, it's described as farming and grazing practices that restore degraded soil and improve biodiversity. It also increases carbon capture to create long-lasting environmental benefits such as positive impact to climate change. There's two primary goals, again, sustainability and then environmental health. So we're looking at the overall climate and the environment in which we are all part of. So Dole Foods, and anybody's not familiar, Dole Foods is practically anybody with vegetables, fruits, and stuff like that. That's where they seem to focus. And I've seen some snack items that they do too, but it's mostly fresh fruit. They are looking to achieve zero carbon emissions at the farm level by 2030. Okay, we're at 2021, and that's going to be hard. And they want to reduce shipping by 30% at 2030 from the 2015 level. So they're trying to give themselves 15 years to reduce shipping emissions by 30%. Some other companies they're doing the exact same thing is a British retailer, Asda or Asta. It's spelled ASDA. I'm not familiar with them. General Mills, Walmart, and one of Walmart's senior managers for sustainable produce said that Walmart is seeking to decarbonize operations and limit waste in the supply chain. So okay, that makes sense. And again, I think because these are big companies, they are probably looking at the overall political impact from the back end because they have such influence from politics and they have so much influence in politics that I think it's a two-way street there. The director of the Stewardship Index for specialty crops admitted that regenerative ag is actually just essentially renaming sustainability, which
There you go.
that's not surprising. So here's some things from that. It seeks to build on the health of the environment and the land. Yep. And then that director said, in quote, in the end, all sectors of the supply chain need to measure their progress. Okay, we'll get there. And then another quote was, growers need some measurements in order to understand if they're actually making strides, and that data needs to be shown as a way to back up any claims. So those two quotes kind of concerned me, and we'll get
They
there
should.
again. So here were my big thoughts. I thought the read would be good on regenerative farming, and to an extent I was right, but with the twist at the end with those, especially with those two quotes. So why do regenerative farming? That's the first thing. It's the same answer we've been saying multiple times. We take care of the land because the land takes care of us. And then the other thing too was, however, the way the article finishes, it just got me concerned all around because on the surface, I agree with the intent and the overall mission. I know Dad does too. But what we focus on is the higher emission sectors first. Like we're talking about trying to reduce 2015 levels in shipping by 30% by the time they get to 2030. Why don't we start there then? Let's focus on there, and then they're saying zero emissions from ranches or farms, but what's the impacts on machinery going to be? You can't just take these machines like swathers and combines and stuff and say they're going to be zero emissions. If you keep the stuff, what we like to say legacy equipment, so things that are built in the 70s or 80s, Are you going to have to add extra special filters to things to reduce those emissions? Like what's that impact to all the machinery that most farmers and ranchers still use and own and they patch together every year? What's going to be that impact? I think they're going to drive people out of agriculture.
That's the whole point. That's the angle as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, I got two more
Anytime.
things real quick. Hold on.
Okay.
Will we do a lengthy study of data analysis before we just make policy, such as executive orders? Something I've been concerned about is we just saw the president sign a bunch of executive orders in the first days of office. I think this is an ongoing issue, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. When an individual is able to just make decisions with the stroke of a pen, without congressional oversight, that becomes very worrisome in any sense, but especially in ag. What additional workloads? Here's the last thing. What additional workloads will you be throwing on producers to obtain these measurements you require? So she was saying growers need to show some sort of measurement, and that everybody needs to show progress. So how do you plan on getting these measurements, especially for somebody who's a small town family owned business like us? We don't have a lot of uh, resources to do that. So, those are just all questions of how are we going to do this? What's the process? There's a lot of great ideas, and I don't think they're necessarily with the greatest intentions that they're brought forward, but the end result is a good thing. But there's also all these mitigation factors in the middle that we're completely bypassing and forgetting about. So, go ahead, Dad.
Okay. Who defines what progress is? Who
Yeah.
defines what the measurements are? You've got all of these different issues that, man, your light just got harsh. Um, what happens? Tone her down a little more. You're just putting too much light on this whole thing. Too much light on the whole subject here. Wow. Anyway, you've got all these definitions. Who comes up with these definitions? There's a couple of groups that you mentioned in there that were academics and government. And anytime you add either one or both of those into something, and then you study things, and then you brought that up, we have to study it before we put it into implementation. Who's studying it? From what angle? Is it biased, unbiased? What are the results they're looking for? And if you don't show progress, which is a word that really bothers me, if you don't show that, then what? What's the because there's going to be if you don't do this, we are going to not let you do fill in the blank. You're not going to be allowed to, you're not going to be able to get fill in the blank on those. Who makes those decisions? This is nothing more than taking and redefining, just as you said, what we have already done to sustain the land and sustain agriculture so that it is one sustainable that's the very word, and hopefully profitable, which doesn't always happen. We've talked about that, but you got to be able to maintain that. So if you don't meet their standards, and their standards are unachievable in some cases,
Like zero emissions, that's not, yeah,
especially with emissions.
that's not possible.
How are you going to do that? Well, what they want us to do is they want us to go back to dragging a sickle mower and picking up hay with a buck rake by horsepower, and then they'll bitch about horses farting too much. I mean, it's nothing you can do. So what they're doing is they're taking something that we're already trying to do through efficiency. Really, is the way we're trying to do it. And if you have let's say for instance a bigger tractor, which we have gotten, but we don't turn dirt. We're not farmers. But I get the ability with that tractor to be more efficient in what we do, and we're able, and most farmers, when they do that, they're buying something that's more efficient so that they can put less wheels on the ground for less amount of time to produce more food. That's a balance that they're trying to be, again, more efficient to be more sustainable. So they're taking this, redefining it into something that they want to do so that they can capture behavior. And that's all this. Let's look at this, what it is. This is a Green New Deal thing. It is
Yeah,
very, very profitable. Al
I think
Gore
that is
has
what it
been
is.
very profitable on selling icebergs are melting and there's no polar bears left. But they deny everything that's going on the positive side. It's never enough for them, so they just keep wanting more and more and more.
Yeah. Well, um, and to go off the zero emissions part too, I was thinking, another thing is you can let's assume we get a tractor that goes with no emissions whatsoever. We've achieved this thing that it can still, that's the other thing too, it can still continue to do and provide the power that's needed to do those things, because that's gonna be a whole nother issue too. You can get something that's zero emissions and it's not gonna have the power. But then let's assume everything's the same. You've reduced the emissions to zero. Uh, you're still going to, because it's a machine, you will still need lubrication, you will still need grease, you will still need tires, you will still need all these things that still originate from petroleum sources like oil. And that's where you keep going further down the road of the secondary and the tertiary effects. There's things that I am concerned about, because then when it gets regulated at that level, 3-4 steps away from us, it's also going to result in higher cost, difficulty in getting supplies, getting things like that. And it's going to continue to, when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, taking care of a factory farming source, because we're trying to keep everything at the lower, at the small level, right? We're trying to keep family businesses in business.
Local.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen if you do things like this, because the local people won't be able to afford that. The big sources like Dole Foods or Walmart, if they've got their own farming operations, they'll do just fine, because they'll end up like Bill Gates has done, start buying up land away from people, and then it's never going to get used again, or it does get used and it's only going to be for 3 or 4 companies. That's where I see this, because it's going to continue to restrict. The more issues you provide or layer on us, the more difficult it's going to be to sustain this. Because I mean, we didn't even make a profit this year. Imagine you do this 3 or 4 years in a row. There, you have no choice but to just fold.
That's right. Well, and at the same time, when you have less and less people competing with their products, what happens to the price of those products? They don't go down.
No.
When you got a monopoly on something,
Yeah.
typically they increase the prices to squeeze them for every amount of blood they got in them. And that's where you're at with corporate farming. You've got people that are making decisions that don't care about sustainability ultimately. They care about what they can get in their personal accounts, whether it be an investment account, but it's to benefit them personally. And they could give a rip what really goes on. Don't
Right.
care. They'll tell you one thing, but it's not what they're really after. They're salesmen. Um, you went through college and got your degree. How many of your college professors were academics? All of them. How many of them really were in touch with what goes on a day-to-day business type? And I'm talking from the time you get up in the morning, what really goes on a farm or ranch? How many of them know that?
No, none of the ones that I had knew.
Me either.
And
Not
and what's
30
what's
years ago.
what's funny is I also went to a college of agriculture school.
Isn't that
So
ironic?
yeah, so I mean,
It's been taken over by people who
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
So how many? Because I would have conversations. I'd be in class, and and I was always taught, speak up. You hear something's not right, speak up. Or maybe you need to listen because you might be wrong and you can learn something.
right,
There were a number of times I had instructors or professors, doctors in class that would make some statement, and even then, 30 years ago, they were anti beef, anti agriculture, and these were. I can remember one was a health class I had to have. I'm like, I had to take this class because I was like, "Are you stupid? I work for a living, trying to go to college. I don't need to go out and play tennis. I don't got a desire for it. Don't need to. I get plenty of exercise, believe me." And so they said, well, you can take this health class in. Fine, do it. And this professor was absolutely anti beef and was talking about how unhealthy beef is and how farmers and ranchers do nothing but feed you a product that is so unhealthy it gives you heart disease, and that we just did whatever we could to rape and pillage the land to produce a fat animal so that we could just do that for $1. And of course, I let him rant and rave. I mean, he was passionate about this. And there was a class, I don't know, there was probably 40, 45, 50 people in this class. I can't remember for sure, but uh, and so I raised my hand. I said, I have a question. And so I started in. I said, why do they raise this product that will cause you to die?
Mm-hmm.
Don't dead people quit buying stuff? I mean, I was being on the ridiculous, but he was absolutely no clue what he was talking about. And so we had a quick economics lesson from me to him about why is it that animals have marbling in the fat or in the meat. What is that for? What is marbling? He didn't even know what marbling was. And I said, this is what causes tenderness. This is what causes taste in your
Flavor.
meat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I said, that's what the producer makes because the consumer wants that. You tell me somebody who says, oh, I'm going to go out, I'm going to have me a dry, bland steak. Can't wait. No, it's always a juicy, flavorful steak that they're after. And so we went into how that is done. And if you don't produce something that has high marbling or at least the desired marbling, you're not going to get paid for it. You tell me how that is economics for and viable for someone who's producing that. I mean, I just ripped into him with facts and about firsthand knowledge, and people were listening, and there was someone going, I never thought of it that way. He's right. That makes total sense.
Yep.
Shut him down. And at least he knew that he was totally screwed. When I had the ability to present some things to a class and you got classmates that are agreeing with you, and I think you had the same thing happen because you are providing logic for them and what they are experiencing for themselves, what they want. It makes sense, and they go, oh yeah, this what he's saying is not true at all. He's obviously, and I did put in, it's fashionable to have this view that is not based on fact, and I just pounded the guy into the freaking ground, and he was at least he was gracious enough to say, you know what, I guess I've never thought of it that way, and I've never had anybody in class who could ever refute this, so maybe I learned something today. Whether that when I was out of class is going to go right back to it or not, probably. I would not be surprised. I would hope that at least he would think that, but this is what people are being taught.
Well, and
So
it goes also to probably some of the more recent things to bring it into perspective, because there's been people recently that have been saying, "Oh, your family must be rich because you guys have uh cattle and stuff like that. These beef prices in the store, you must be making a killing." And that's when I immediately correct them. And we've talked about it on here, but to reiterate, the prices and the costs that you see and have to endure at the grocery store at somewhere like Walmart for beef is not because it's coming from cattlemen. That's coming from the middleman. The people who package that and the people who butcher that and give it to the stores, that's who's making the killing right now. Because what they have figured out is they've going through business class right now for my master's, they've managed to have a scale of economy. Their scale of economy is they have cattle producers all over the country and all over the globe who can produce into their funnel. Their funnel is 3 or 4 major systems or major corporations that have the ability to butcher those animals and package them after they've gone through a feedlot. And many of those feedlots, they either own through their own direct corporation or through a subsidiary where they can control them, and they get it again funneled to them. So they're using a scale of economy to use a very broad stroke of just taking whatever they want because they have the ability to underbid and it's not going to hurt them at all. They can go somewhere else and they can pick up the exact same source for a cheaper cost, and they keep playing us against each other as the producers. And when
Well,
we
producer to the consumer, they're playing that end so that
well, what I'm saying though is
they're even out of it. They don't even act like they're there
well, yeah,
to a
that's true
consumer.
too. But what I'm saying is, hey, I'm not going to take your cattle because I can get it for cheaper in Kansas. Or Kansas is like, hey, I can't go lower. Like, well, I can go to Oklahoma. They can play this game until they get the prices they want, and then they pull it. And then they turn around, they butcher and package the meat, and they sell it to you, the consumer, for 300 to 400 times the amount that they are buying for. And that's how
Five
they're
to
making.
six this last year. Five to
Was it
six
5 to 6?
hundred% increase in the profit they already had.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I keep telling people, is like, it's not us, man. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's not us. It's not the cattle guys. It's not the cattle women. It's the in the middle people that are getting us both. And when they see it, and when I explain the process, and it's not me being um outlandish or anything like that, or trying to be completely uh passionate about something where I'm just misspeaking every turn I go. It's laying out the facts and saying this is what the process is. This is why it is the way it is. They go, "Oh, okay." But the problem is they also don't understand well enough to be able to spread that word to other people too. So in a way we're our own sounding system. Like, listen, listen, listen. We're right here. This is what's happening, and it's hard. You can be the town crier in the middle of a town, but at some point some people just won't listen.
Well, and my broader point to this whole thing is, and you brought up the Packers and how they have locked up the funnel. They also have the money to lobby
Yes.
our, guess what, legislators into some of our trades, making trade embargoes or trade deals with different countries. They lock that up through them, and then when you have, as you were saying earlier, the academics and the government making choices for you, the academics, as I said, they don't even know what the hell's going on. They have no clue, yet they are making decisions based on, guess what, their agenda or lobbyists or people who they agree with without having the facts. And then when you couple that with your, say, your Packers and their lobbyists to your legislators, you don't stand a damn chance. And that is the problem right there. Is it? I think people need to really go hungry and understand where their food comes from and what's been happening to them and why they're spending so much to get it in their house from a grocery store. And they'll blame a grocer for having high
Right.
prices. That grocer's not making money either.
Right.
That's why like a gas station, um, going up there and yelling at the cashier because the price of gas is too high. That many of those gas stations are making 2-3 cents a gallon. They're hoping you buy a candy bar when
Right.
you come in the store because they're going to make more on that than they are on that tank of gas that you just spent 40, 50, 60, depending on what you're driving, $70 on. So it's all misplaced. And you're right, the finger pointing, and I think it's the veil, who's pulling the levers behind the curtain is insidious. And that person doesn't just control the curtain and the people, they control everything to their benefit, to their advantage. So this is nothing more than rebranding something we're already doing, but then trying to change it for a political agenda.
Right. And I think that's what it is. When she said, again, I think it was a female. She said that in the end, this is the same. All that they've done is change the name to regenerative farming. We've already been sustaining. We already do that. This is who we are. It's what we do. Um,
Well,
the
think
the other
about
thing.
buzzwords.
What's
It's
that?
think about buzzwords in sales.
Yeah.
Regenerative sounds like recycling. Oh, that's such a good thing. We
Hmm.
need to recycle. We need to regenerate. It's car salesmanship.
Which is yes, because that's also interesting, and that you say it like that. Recycling, because uh, there's processes. So those, again, we're not farmers, but we are in an area of the world where strip farming is a thing. And if you don't know what strip farming is, it's you literally take your field, you make it into strips, And these strips can be, let's say 3 or 4 combine swaths wide, just for uh, argument's sake. And what they'll do is they'll go 4 combine wide of planted product, barley, wheat, whatever. Then you'll go 4 combines wide of dirt, and then another 4 of wheat, and then another 4 dirt. That's recycling the ground too, because what happens the next year is what was dirt is then replanted. What was planted is left as dirt. There's multiple reasons for that. Again, sustainability, to take care of the ground, let it rest, let it recuperate, get some minerals.
Well, yeah, it's called summer fallow.
Mm-hmm.
The ground is laid fallow for a year so that it can regenerate and it can break down what had been grown in it the year before. Again, what do they call that now? What is the fancy word for this?
Regenerative farming.
Carbon sequester,
Oh,
too,
okay. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Right?
But what was the interesting part about that is, while that is sustainable and it's recycling the ground and the soil nutrients that are in strip farming, what started that, if I remember correctly, was an outside resource or outside external source from the weather, and that was the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl forced farmers to do that so that all the dirt wouldn't just get blown away, because they didn't have enough water and it would get hard and just simply turn into sand and get blown away, and then you couldn't have crops. So they would do strip farming to try and help. Much like dirt and grass holds the dirt back from flash floods and stuff like that. It was a very similar concept, and that's what ended up creating it. And it's interesting how things like that worked out when it wasn't necessarily the intent, but it did become the sustainable effort.
Yeah, that was necessary. And if you look in our country, especially where we have a lot of wind, those strips never run east and west. They run north and south to
Yep.
minimize the surface damage done by the wind.
Yep.
And we have prevailing west winds. You got to minimize that. So, but there are also some farmers, and they got some right next to us that is a Hutterite colony, much like the Amish, only they like high tech.
Mhm.
And they block farm everything. They haven't learned a damn thing from the past, and they are putting every year, but they're doing it with chemical.
Mm.
And so, they put a bunch of weed killer on stuff and then plant. And when they plant, they come up, they fertilize with chemical. And so, they have that's regenerative to them, isn't necessarily regenerative. It's just to sustain growth. So it'll be interesting to see what that happens to that ground over time and what kind of, because I also worry about residual things that are
Yeah.
in the ground.
Water,
And that's
stuff
why
like
I
that.
don't like spraying. We spray for weeds what we have to, but I don't care for that, and we're very careful about what kind of products we try to choose to do it, so that we don't do more damage than what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to get Braden's take on it from the range management part, about the way the Hooderites they farm, because he would be able to tell, or at least have a decent idea of what would be the recovery time, the proper recovery time, if after 50 years of farming just like that, to I guess nutrientize, trying to get the nutrients back into the soil, and to really bring it back, because I guarantee 1 year rest, to do it the right way, 1 year rest wouldn't work. I would bet it might be closer to a decade or maybe 2 to let it really recuperate the way it should.
Yeah, he's mentioned that a time or two, depending on, and it's basically the chemical used,
Uh huh.
what chemicals you put on it, and he said some of that stuff will last just decades.
Yep.
So you're talking 20, 30 years that you could have not full potential of what you had as a natural type soil. But at the same time, every time you disturb the soil, you stir up seeds and you can get weeds.
Right.
So, I mean, I've got no issue with trying to control those. It's just I don't know that there's a great long-term benefit to um, preventative spraying
Mm-hmm.
in a thing like that. I know what they're trying to do is they're trying to maximize every drop of water in that ground to go towards something they want, not what they don't want. And I get that.
Well, and that's another thing too. Kind of going down two things. The reason why I thought about the recovery time is when we talked about it when I was home. Braden had said something about uh certain trees. I think it's the white birch. It's it takes like 100 years for it to finally its cycle for coming back to life after like a fire is like a century, and that's not a joke. It takes that long, and so my next thing would be I almost wonder, instead of turning the earth and disking it and doing that, I almost wonder if going through and doing prescribed burns would help that in a sense. Maybe shorten the recuperation time because it would put the nutrients back into the soil, so to speak, and burn it, and then it becomes ash, and maybe reduce the recovery time in half, or maybe to three-quarters of what it would be normally. That'd be an interesting concept too.
Well, you've seen grass fires, what they do on a prairie, and the
Right.
next year they come back, even that fall, if it's during in the summer, yeah,
Green.
that's potash, basically what they're putting on there through the fire. And what happens even in the fall with a little bit of water, that growth starts to take off and it's greener, better, it's regenerated. So the Indians, Plains Indians, used to purposely set fire
Hmm.
and to cause that to happen. They recognized early on that, hey, this brings in more game. It brings in better grass. And not that they were there all the time because they were nomadic, they moved, but they did follow the herds. And
Right.
if they could improve that, they could get more concentration of animals. And these were, big prairie fires. Set them and let them go. Stay
Well,
upwind.
I was gonna say there's nothing that's gonna hurt it. Well,
No,
that's
not then.
it's interesting that you said that because I was thinking the exact same thing, because that's also going back to my undergraduate days. The course I took with Yellowstone National Park, it explained a lot of the fire management, because that was one of our week's discussions, was fire management, and how Native Americans would do that. Not so much in the mountains, but it did occur sometimes. It was mostly on the prairies, but
Right.
even then, those prescribed burns early on, I guess, those did help because it kept undergrowth, especially in like forests and stuff, from developing so heavily that to getting the massive fires we get now, because there was a regular cyclic occurrence that helped mitigate all that extra undergrowth.
Well, and I think, our lightning fires, lightning strikes are a way that happened in the mountains. The Indians didn't spend a lot of time in the mountains except for the summertime. They would move
It got
their
hot.
little cooler. Yeah.
Yep.
But, most of the game was not in the mountains then before, white guys explored this and the trappers showed up. Most of the game was down on the prairie, including grizzly bear, elk, moose, bighorn sheep. They were all down low, and we've pushed them in the mountains just because of our encroachment. So they went there for relief in the summertime, laying by the water, a little cooler, the foothills, but certainly to go in the mountains was more exploratory. It wasn't because they were surviving. So they were trying to improve through these burns what they were doing in the mountains. Indians didn't fight fire. Why would you? What's the
There's no
point?
need to. Yeah.
What tools do you have to do that? I mean, you get out of its way, just like any other animal would do. So, um, like the Yellowstone Park, when it burned in '88, that was a massive buildup of deadfall and uh, wood that had been suppressed from fire for decades. Smokey Bear didn't do us any favors. I think your brother will he'll go on about
He's
Smokey
very
Bear.
passionate about Smokey Bear being the one of the worst propaganda campaigns in America.
It's exactly what it is. Propaganda campaign, make people feel good. And when I was in college during the fires of '88, of course I was a older student, but there were some that were, oh my God, this is horrible. This is why we haven't managed, or we have to manage and put everything out. And you're like, you know what? You've done that. This is the price you're now paying for that. I mean,
Hmm.
some of us we almost
To,
got in fist fights
to this
in the
day, it's
science
California.
department over, yeah, I mean, not managing something, not doing anything is not management.
Right.
So they should have let those burn in areas. And I can understand, saving some historic structures, fine, but let it burn. It will eventually burn out. And uh, ultimately, what happened with Yellowstone? Do you know what put that fire out? The snows in the late fall,
Mm-hmm.
winter. That's what put those fires out. We saved structures, but they spent a tremendous amount of resource and time to do something that they could not really fully attain. So it was not about a firefighting effort to stop the fire. It was about protecting structures, and that's really where they learned in a hurry. This is where we're at, because you can't stop a fire that's got that kind of deadfall and build up over 100 years of not managing it correctly. So
Right. Well,
Indians didn't fight fire, dude.
I think another thing too is you said the feel good campaign is how you said that. I think that's a lot of where this, going back to the article, where a lot of this comes from, unfortunately. And uh that drives me to a point that we we went past really quickly, and I want to just make sure we hit this, because I think it's
Don't
very
tell me you want
important.
to circle back.
Yeah, one would say circle back. um yeah,
You
the
haven't been
thing.
watching White House press briefings, have you?
No, I don't
Every
know.
time that she can't answer a question, she says, "Well, we'll circle back." I think she did it like 70 times this last week or something.
I
It's crazy.
Being a conservative individual who's in the military, and I'll leave it at that, I try to stay away from the news as much as possible recently, because there's been a lot of negative stuff going on all parties. So I'm just like, I'm not doing this right now.
Yeah, I get it. I get
but
it.
but anyway, yes, the to circle back, we talked about how you reduce. We're gonna assume we can reduce emissions all the way to zero at the farm or ranch level by 2030. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. If it does happen, there are some consequences to that. And here's one of those consequences: you get equipment or trucking, because what is a lot of agriculture distribution results from trucking. It's just the way it is because of the products that are available. Now, can you get away with movement of probably crops without trucking? Well, I would say to an extent you probably could. Now, locally, no, it has to
No,
come through truck. Non-locally, if you're moving something from, for example, California to New York, absolutely. I think you could do probably air travel pretty easy. But it's also going to
oh,
be very heavy, so you're going to get better bang for your buck going rail.
exactly. That's why
And
they did rail. Yeah.
well, in rail, here we go. You could probably use um let's say natural gas, but it's probably one, or actually one of our cleaner emissions would be nuclear. Let's say you have a nuclear engine that can travel. Okay. I don't know if we even have those, but that would be cool because we got nuclear submarines. Why not have a nuclear rail engine?
Yeah,
Um,
nuclear powered aircraft carriers.
yeah,
That's a moving
exactly.
city.
Yep. Well, and that was part of the reason why, again, COVID, those sailors were able to go on, I think it was a 6 or 7 month tour without refuel, was because they had that nuclear capacity. And with that, it's one of the coolest energies I think there is. I would love to learn more at some point in my life about it, but I know there's still a lot of debate on whether or not it's really clean or whatnot. But um, again, because of the contingency issues of what helped create that in the first place, and everything surrounding it. But the consequences looking at zero emissions at the farm or ranch level is that you're going to limit those trucking capabilities. You're going to limit the production capabilities. So if you are a farmer, those pieces of equipment that are moving across the fields to cut things and to process them, you're going to have to explain how that's going to happen with zero emissions, because I don't see that being possible.
It's
And then,
not thought out. That's the thing. It's
right.
again, it's
And
propaganda.
that's what I'm getting towards, is that
Yeah.
this hasn't been thought out, because here's the big thing that I think of for us specifically. You're looking at the movement of, we've done this before, a large trailer full of horses or cattle. Now, how much does one of those trailer loads carry at one time? Well, depending on what it is, let's say I think the biggest we've ever had was 8 horses in the trailer. That's a lot of horses at essentially 1,200 a pop. You're looking at close to 10,000 pounds. And so that's just in horse meat, essentially. And they're being there as bone and flesh. That's a lot of weight. Now,
And that's just a regular saddle horse. That's not
right,
a draft
it's not
horse.
draft horse, no, nothing like that. Now, here's where I'm really trying to drive home the point. You can drive across the United States, the majority of the United States, and be fine trailering those horses. You go towards the west in Montana, Idaho, Utah, probably parts
Wyoming, yeah.
Wyoming, parts of Arizona, California, where it gets mountainous. Do you realize how difficult that is to go up and down a hill? Down to an extent is hard because you have to try and, control it from going crazy and going super fast. But up is the problem. We have a pickup truck. Like, it struggles with all of that horse meat, and it still is revving to get up there. And I guarantee you would probably be better off having a semi truck to do something like that. And that is not going to, you're going to lose power, is what I'm trying to get to. If you go, let's say, electric pickup or something like that, which is still going to be emissions to begin with, but you're using a how people like to say, it's a cleaner version. Again, it's debatable, but let's say that is the cleanest version, is going an electric pickup. That electric pickup is not going to have the power to pull up the horses. I don't think long term. Now, I've seen things with Tesla. They have electric pickup that outperformed a normal combustible engine pickup. But they were pulling against each other, and it was more like it was a tug. It was like a tug and war between the two of them. I don't know how well that how compatible that is to trailering or pulling something. I would love to see that, but as of right now, I one, that's also not economically feasible for anybody. You'd have to buy ranchers and farmers don't have the money to buy a Tesla pickup to try that out just for kicks. But
How's it work in the cold weather? This morning
yeah.
it was 11, 12 below here. You
Okay.
tell me how the electric battery works.
Oh
At that
yeah,
kind of
zaps it, completely zaps it.
So answer me this. What happens long term? Because if this is all about, we call it sustainability, they call it regenerative. You're talking into the future, right? So
Yeah.
what happens? I don't know of a battery yet that runs indefinitely.
Mm-mm.
What happens when the capability to recharge that battery occurs? Then what do you do with that battery, which is charged by, guess what? Coal-fired plants. So
As of right
this is
now,
all
it is. Yeah.
propaganda. Yeah, this is propagandized to the point where people only see what they want them to see, or what, those that are behind the curtain. Again, the media is part of that. Elon Musk is a bright guy, but let's face it, he is absolutely out of touch with what can be done in agriculture. That's not what he wants. It doesn't matter. He is catering to a consumer class that can afford high dollar and make themselves feel good about having power
Right.
in a sports car, or an engine, or pickup, or rocket, you name it. So it's again, it's like statistics. What is revealed is interesting, but what's hidden is vital. So what happens to a battery when it's outlived its usefulness? What happens? What can you do? Can you recycle or regenerate that battery?
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is, if you can't, how do you dispose of it properly?
Yeah,
Because
there you go. Then
I
that's
mean,
where I'm headed.
we already have issues with dumps. I mean, I think as a human, specifically in America, because I'm not sure how the other nations in the world work, and I'm sure places like China and Russia, just based off their mentality, they don't care. They just kind of figure it out.
No,
But for the United States, we have a pretty good understanding of, trying to take care of dump areas where, we layer over it, we let the earth essentially decompose it, and then we'll try and pull it back up and use the same area again if possible.
a lot of methane recovery done in some dumps in some areas
Yeah, and
because
I
of
think
that.
and I think that's also a good reason, because we're trying to, again, sustainability, and make sure that we're taking care of the earth, because the earth takes care of us. But then at the same time, we're not constantly just moving one dump to another area and just constantly, making this problem bigger. We're trying to keep it as contained as possible. But the problem is, there's stuff that just doesn't decompose. Styrofoam is one of them. And And what about, like you're saying, those batteries? What, first of all, what's in those batteries? And second of all, a thing that a lot of people don't think about, but we do constantly as farmers and ranchers, water. What happens if that soaks into the ground and contaminates even the littlest bit our water source? We're done. Not only just for living, but for taking care of anything. It's going to kill our ground. It's going to kill our animals. We can't do it. Water is one of our biggest things.
Well, and that also is one of the very first things that these groups that don't want you to farm and ranch bring up, that you're gonna contaminate the groundwater. What are you doing to the water? That's the very first thing that they bring up.
It's one of the
And
first things
it's
that we always talk about. We're like, all right, what's that going
well,
to
but
do to water?
right, but that's one of their arguments, to shut things down
Right.
entirely, not to mitigate, but to shut down.
Yeah.
So there's a whole big difference there between what you're after and what you need, and what's reasonable.
And I like that you bring that up, because uh that's the one of the first things that I always throw back in their face whenever anybody's challenged me on that. I said, okay, what about it? Because I guarantee we're on the same side on this one. And like, well, you just want it. No, I don't. What's the, what if you're in the middle of winter and you have horses and cattle? What's more important, water or food?
Exactly.
Food. It's going to be food. No, it's not.
Water.
It's the water. Believe it or not, it's the water. What about during the summertime? Food or water? Oh, probably water because it gets hot. Yeah, you're right. You're right on that one. You're wrong on the winter part. Well, there's water all over the part with snow and stuff. They're not going to drink the snow. It's
They
like
can't. They dehydrate when you do that.
right, and those are the little points that I always make. I'm like, you're not thinking about water is always the number one thing. That's with ranching. Now imagine doing that with farming. If they don't have water, there's no way they can grow those crops, especially in Montana where we're in a rain shadow half of the state. It just
Right.
doesn't work.
Right. No, but see, it's all about, again, who who gets to who gets to say how well or how bad things are being done. It's the
Yeah.
one who writes the propaganda, and that's what it is.
Well,
And
and
you
the
can say,
policies too. Not even just that, but let's go
well,
past propaganda or a mentality. What are your policies? What are your laws? And how do you plan to get there? Because if you're not incorporating the farmers and ranchers, it's not feasible.
how do
Or
you
it
get
is,
support for laws?
well, you got to get voters to get on it, but
And how do you get them to agree with you?
money.
And what's it going to do for me?
Yeah.
What's the right
Most
thing to
people want
do?
money
So you're
though.
writing propaganda, you are producing propaganda, whether it's us doing it through education, or somebody says, I hate cows. I'm a vegan. These are evil. And I got no issue with somebody who doesn't want to eat meat. If they don't want to eat meat because they don't want to eat meat, that's their business. That's their absolute right to do that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
don't tell everybody else they can't do it either, because that's what you want. And then when you start going down that road of, oh, they have feelings. Yeah, they do. Yeah, don't doubt it. I don't think they contemplate things like we do, but if you don't think a cow has feelings, try taking her calf away from her, or watch her
Yeah.
when she stands over her dead calf sometime when she hasn't been maternal enough to lick it off, or the weather has gotten so cold that that calf dies before I can get to it and keep it alive through intervention. At that point, you tell me whether an animal has feelings. Yes, they are, but they also are a food source. And that is what we do. We keep people alive that way. And if your beliefs in however you want to portray and propagate your personal bias or your personal dislike of something, fine. I've got no issue with that. Don't wear leather. Don't eat meat. You know, don't wear anything that has been produced with oil. So take your Patagucci jacket off because it's plumb full of petroleum.
Mm-hmm.
With these, or your plastic tennis shoes, um, or your canvas Converse tennis shoes. Probably, a lot of people don't even know what that is anymore. That's all we had as tennis shoes. As a kid, was a pair of shoes that were made with a rubber sole and canvas over the top. Canvas is made from, guess what? Plants. So, all this crap of, oh, it's a living thing, so I'm not gonna eat it. Great. Now, this problem's gonna take care of itself in about a week, but they always give in. Guess what? They like their food.
Well, and I think the other thing too, we already established, I think, why this is getting promoted, because it's going to ultimately push out the family owned businesses and ranches and farms. But you also just made a point about, um oh, I had it for a second. It was with trying to get rid of the objects, the things that you don't like. So if I'm a vegan, I don't want to do leather, or I don't want to have jello, or anything like that, because that comes from a cow. The other thing too is we're focused on zero emissions and trying to get everything to a minimal value or zero value. And I think it's difficult to do that. You got to pick your battles too. So here's where it is. In a industry where we really don't, I don't think we create that many emissions realistically. It's very low overall. If I were to look at the whole process, the most emissions you're going to have is when machinery is running and when you're trucking stuff, just because of the nature of it. And we
And you're
kind of,
not letting it sit there idle overnight because it's fun and I like to spend money. You use
right.
that as efficiently as possible.
Yes, and it's going towards an end product. It's not just because I'm burning fuel because I want to. There's a it's like investing in something. I got to put a
Yeah.
little, I got to give up a little bit to get stuff back. So
Yes.
in this sense, it's our return on investment, our being able to eat. And with about 8 minutes to go, I would say the thing that we've got is you're looking at that with a cow of, I don't want to eat the cow because it does all these, it does produce these things, but I don't want anything associated with that cow because I feel like that's my stance. Okay, that's fine. But if we're looking at zero emissions, you also have to look at other sectors, other businesses, other industries that do not, that create more emissions. And I think that's where you focus, and that's what I'm trying to say. With in an industry, an agriculture industry being lower on the emission scale, I think personally I'd have to look at stuff to try and get an absolute answer to that. Your other places that do create high emissions are going to be things like cell phone production, computer production, car manufacturing, things like that I think are easier to manage probably than the agriculture industry. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple of things there. There's two lines to go down. Right now, the big push is wind and solar, and we see a
Yeah,
bunch of wind towers in our
always
area.
have.
Yeah, that's how we used to get water out of the ground here, and there's a few places that still use the old windmills. Um, but what happens when one of those windmills, these big wind turbines, what happens when they at the end of their life? How is that regenerated? What happens to those blades? Where do they go?
And I don't know.
They're non-recyclable. They are burying them.
And there's my
And
point that we had earlier. What do you do with that?
exactly. Why is it we have very limited solar panel production in this country?
Well, I know that those also the same thing. You can't get rid of it. The return on investment on solar panels is actually very low.
It is, but I'm talking, why are they not even produced? I mean,
High
whenever you
petroleum
have
use.
pardon me?
I mean, you use a lot of petroleum to create them to begin with, if that's what you're.
Well, what I'm getting at is we want to have zero emissions, but most of those are made overseas in places like China,
Yeah, okay.
especially, because guess what? They don't pay attention to emissions. They don't care.
Right.
And so you've got this production of solar panels taking place over there where there are zero give a shits about how much they're polluting to produce something that comes here to make you feel good about installing it, and it has limited sustainability overall. They're getting better, but the paradox there is all about propaganda. Again, what you think and what you're told to think and how this is going to make you feel. So that in itself is the biggest paradox in all of it. Is like, okay, I'm doing something green, but I'm not thinking about how I'm getting that power. I'm not thinking about where Tesla's batteries are going. I'm not thinking
Yep.
about where these turbine blades are happening after the fact, because it makes me feel good to know that I'm at zero emissions. I am zero carbon. Like bullshit that you are. You just don't. You just have separated yourself through several middlemen
Yeah.
and refuse to look at that and see things for its totality of what's happening. And
Well,
that's our problem. We don't see things from the very start to the very finish. Now, I've got a
yeah.
solution for sustainable energy that will cost development, but once that is up and running, and I've thought this for years, and I don't know how to solve it.
You told
And
me. It's a great idea.
I think it's doable. It's just a matter of you don't need the damn government in the way to shut you down on how to get there. And that's the same thing about production. They don't want us producing anything in this country. We want to be a consumer society, and that's part of the problem where we're at with our trade with other countries. But if you could develop a way to store electricity that's produced through lightning strikes, the state of Florida alone is a unbelievably solid and renewable lightning strike area. And then you put that on a power grid, store it, put it on a power grid. Once you can get over that initial, from the sheer power of an electric lightning
To
strike,
capture it, there's two things:
to
capturing
capture
and
that,
storage. Yeah.
yes, you would have nuclear is, I think it would be outdated.
Oh yeah.
Where and as long as we have an atmosphere, you're going to have electricity through lightning, and it occurs all over the nation. Everywhere has it. Some places are more prone than others, but if you could do that all over the world, we're not the only place that has lightning strikes. I think you would solve that, and it's clean for the most part. I don't know what the development phase would be in order to store that, but certainly I think that would be much more feasible and viable for all of our home heating, um, ground type of movement. Now, airplane is a different story. We still made, and probably will need to depend on that unless you go nuclear in that direction. I don't know. But as far as a fossil fuel, fossil fuels are tough to beat, and we can probably do a little bit better. We have done better in our emissions, and what we've done. I mean, I was making in my former life, when I first started there, we had no idea how we could get sulfur in diesel down to less than 500 parts per million. How are we going to do this? This is incredible.
That's
I don't
crazy
know how we're
too.
going to do it. Didn't think we could do it. I was making diesel at the minimum when I retired. I was making light virgin naphtha and distillate, and we were producing that stuff. We had a limit. We could go down to 5 parts per million. We could actually get to zero
That's
if
crazy.
we wanted, but we were doing it through the reactors. I mean, it was not without a cost.
Right.
We have reactors that had catalyst in it to do all of that, and the only reason we were doing the 10 to 15 parts per million is because that's what the spec was for that fuel and what was mandated, and we would stay below that so that we could meet that spec. But we could make it less, but it it was expensive to do that. It
Right.
cost money to make that happen. So there's ways to do things. Yes. I don't know what the offset would be to develop lightning capture, but I still think it would be a good way to go. And we can still have fossil fuels because I don't know how you're going to make plastics without it. You're going to have to
Right.
do something different there. You're going to have that always. Polyesters, any kind of a fossil fuel derived clothing or material, and we surround ourselves with it. We've utilized that very, very well.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well, and I think today with regenerative farming, the big takeaways are, you gotta define what exactly you're looking for, other than simply zero emissions. I don't think that's a realistic one. You got to get input from those who are going to be infected. You can't just mandate stuff, otherwise there are going to be costly effects. And then you got to know, like you said, the whole process. What is it gonna take to get there, and what is it gonna take afterwards? What are those, those first, second, third order effects? And other than that,
well, there's always
yeah.
there's always something that's involved in that too. And what I worry about a lot, and it happens in legislation all the time, is creep and regulation. I
Yeah.
call it creep. And it's like, okay, you have to be able to prove that you're going to be able to do this regenerate to our definition as it is right now. And that
Yep.
definition always changes.
Yep.
And then they keep getting tighter and tighter, tighter to where you can't do it anymore, or we're not going to allow you to survive. We're not going to allow you as a business to stay in business. We're going to take this over for you. And you name me a single government run anything that has been successful. Indian Health Service, how's that working for them?
It hasn't for the last 150
Veterans
years.
Affairs, how is the VA working for our soldiers?
It's not.
It's not. Welfare, how's that working out? How costly is that, and how good of a service are they doing? How about your WIC programs for women and children and food? They're giving away damn cell phones and debit cards to people who aren't working, and they're making a living doing it, and through fraud, because it's government run. There's no oversight there at a very local level. I mean, it's a broad stroke, which is a whole nother issue why they do what they do. But there is nothing that I can think of that is government run that is efficient, successful, and beneficial.
Yeah. And I think that's the worry that we see with this is
Creep.
the extra policies, the creep.
Yeah. Creep. Yep.
So with that, I think we will thank everybody until you're better paid.
Until you're better paid. Yep.